All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to give folks just another minute or two to get the Zoom open and pop in, but it's good to see some names popping up. Benjamin, Ian, James, Jason, Jen. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm going to give folks just another 60 seconds to get in here and join us, and then we will get started. I see my friend and landlord Steve on the list. Hi, Steve. Longtime BHA member. I see Nick, one of our newest board members in Central Oregon. Hi, Nick. Right on. Okay. Hi, Steve. See you in the chat. Well, just a couple quick notes before we get started here. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I am really excited for this conversation. If you don't know me, my name is Jamie. I am one of the Oregon Chapter BHA board members based down in Central Oregon. I'm super excited to be hosting this conversation tonight between Chad Dotson, who is the steward at the Nature Conservancy's Zumwalt Prairie Preserve, and Tyler Houck. Is that right? Houck?
Yes.
Okay, great. Of Zumwalt Guiding, who is obviously a guide on the Zumwalt. Hopefully at this point you already know about the Zumwalt Prairie, but if not, tonight's going to be a great opportunity to learn a little bit more. From my perspective, this is one of the coolest places in Oregon that I have been ever. Just a spectacular place. And Oregon BHA is very fortunate and really excited to be raffling off a trophy mule deer hunt on the preserve this fall that was donated by the Nature Conservancy. So thanks so much to TNC for making that happen. 100% of the proceeds from this raffle will be going to public access initiatives in Northeast Oregon. And specifically, we're really excited to be making a nice fat donation to the expansion of the Minot River Wildlife Area, which is northeast of La Grande. This will move about 15,000 acres of land from private ownership to state-owned, publicly accessible land. And it's important winter range. It's just really important wildlife habitat all around, and it'll be a wonderful thing to have access to. We've already made a $10,000 donation last year, and we're looking forward to making another big one with the help of raffle tickets purchases. So hopefully you've already seen it on our various social media channels and our emails, but we do still have tickets available for another month-ish, maybe 5 weeks. I just dropped the link in the chat. And yeah, tickets are $25 for one, or 5 for $100. And we've already raised $23,000. Pretty awesome. So don't wait. Buy a couple more while you still can before they sell out. And yeah, help support some really awesome conservation work in Oregon. A couple tech housekeeping notes. This is recorded, so if you really want to reference something tomorrow or share it with a buddy, share it with your parents, grandparents who maybe want to buy a raffle ticket, you can just find it on our YouTube channel probably tomorrow. Please put your questions in the kind of Q&A or chat box at any time. Don't wait until the end, because sometimes we can get a big list, and these guys are definitely interested in hearing from you as we're going. So please just pop them in there as they come up. And if for some reason it's glitchy or you can't hear us, something's going wrong, just try closing out of Zoom and then reopening it. Usually that solves most people's problems. But feel free to just send us a chat or a question too if you're having some kind of issue that you can't resolve. So with that in mind, I'll go ahead and pass it off to Tyler and Chad. Thank you so much for joining us, guys.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. So we are going to kind of tag the team this thing tonight. Tyler will hop in when he sees fit, and I'll get out of his way, and vice versa. We have a short PowerPoint presentation that we'll share, but along the way, like Jamie said, if we have conversation or questions that are pertinent to that part of the presentation, then don't hesitate to throw her a line in the chat, and we'll try to get to that. And it could spur some other good conversation from there, which we're all about. So yeah, with that, I think if we're ready, we'll jump into presentation. Okay, Jamie, is that loaded up?
Yeah, it looks great.
You guys got it. So like Jamie said in her nice introduction, I'm Chad Dotson, 5th generation in Wallowa County. My ancestors moved in the 1870s-ish, so we've been there for a while. I got started out on the Zumwalt in 2013. I was a contracted guide out there at the time, and held that job to 2017, at which time Tyler took over and has taken the reins from there till now. So in 2017, then I was hired full-time for the Nature Conservancy as a preserve steward. It's a whole laundry list full of things that I do that pertain to work on and off the preserve out there, the Zumwalt Prairie Preserve. So for this presentation and lingo going forward, a lot of times we'll say ZPP, just so I don't get carried away with TNC acronyms. You guys know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the ZPP. Tyler, why don't you hop on and give your little bio shout?
Well, first off, this is pint night, right? So I do have some beer that I managed to find. So
Cheers. Yeah.
there we go. Cheers. Yeah, I grew up in Southwest Oregon, fished and hunted my whole life, and then kind of started guiding in 2008 up in Alaska. Just kind of lucked my way into it, was in the right place at the right time, and I lived with a native family up there for 4 years, and we did brown bear hunts and Sitka black-tailed deer. And when we weren't doing hunts, we were doing photo tours for people off cruise ships up there. And then when that ended and I came back to the lower 48, I worked at a couple 9-to-5 jobs until I was lucky enough to land my dream job being a guide on the ZPP, or the Zumwalt Prairie Preserve, with Chad. And since then, I've been able to learn more than I had ever hoped about deer and elk hunting. And there's always more to learn, of course, and I spend as much time as I can on the preserve. I always have the excuse that I'm scouting, so I'm up there all the time. And nobody's more excited when people win those tags than I am, because that means I get to have another excuse to be up there and go hunting over and over again. Yeah, so that's me.
I feel like that's up pretty well for when I was guiding too. Like any excuse to get out there. Those are the tricks of the trade. I told Tyler, I was like, oh yeah, you probably better go scout. You know, it's like June.
I need to hang another trail camera.
Yeah, we're super lucky that TNC lets us use the property in that way from a guide standpoint. So it's a fortunate situation for me when I was guiding, and then for Tyler now, and just really awesome opportunity that TNC provides for the hunting community. And so I guess a little bit about the preserve. Let's see if I can get back on track here. There we are. So the ZPP is about 33,000 acres. The greater Zumwalt Prairie is around 250,000 acres. So that distinction is important. A lot of times people talk about the Zumwalt Prairie and they assume Nature Conservancy straight across, and it's not that. It's a working landscape with ranchers, predominantly cattle ranchers, but then you have all of these other vested interests mixed into that landscape. and figuring out how to make those ecosystems fit together and work together, is the great question across the West, right? The Nature Conservancy on the Zumwalt Prairie is just a part of that equation. But the preserve itself is 33,000 acres. We have some programs that are ongoing or programs that we've done that are pretty ZPP specific. The biggest driver for a lot of our programs right now is centered around sustainable grazing. Get to that a little bit more in a second on that one. There's been pretty extensive grad student pollinator studies, fire grazing food web studies, noxious weed treatment, protocol, strategy, science, dealing with a whole host of invasive noxious weeds and grasses, which again, a huge problem across the West and here in Oregon. We do some habitat restoration work, whether it's, maybe you've been out to the preserve before and seen these great big aspen exclosures that we have. We've done stream restorations, we've done pond removal for various reasons, whether they're in stream to help salmon and steelhead species, or pond enhancements. A lot of people say, oh, TNC's out there taking out all the ponds, wildlife don't have anything to drink. It's the opposite. A lot of times we'll do pond enhancements or spring enhancements, if that's the right prescription for that particular key habitat. We partner with a lot of our neighbors on conservation easements, meaning that a lot of the ranchers around us hold a lot of the same values that TNC does in terms of beef production, land use, and they want to make sure that those types of projects that we see eye to eye with are sustainable in perpetuity. So a lot of those types of easements are set up so that they're able to do that from generation to generation within their families or within their partnerships. We work a lot with the local tribal and local fisheries. Camp Creek, which you see there in the background, and its tributaries, is close to 90% of that watershed is housed within the boundaries of ZPP. So we have a lot of influence on, that watershed, right? It empties down into Big Sheep Creek, which goes to the Unaha and into the Snake. There are salmon and steelhead. There's every spring active steelhead reds that show up in Camp Creek, and it's a productive fishery, which is another cool way that we can partner with local entities that you might not think about when you think of the prairie. We have these awesome social, cultural ties to the outdoors, to outdoor recreation. So we try to tie that into our engagement programs, and that's a lot of where our hunt program fits in. So, like I said, I wanted to jump back to sustainable grazing just a little bit. And we're thinking about it holistically. Are we able to provide a working model in which a producer, the land resource, i.e. the grass, and the wildlife resource can all mutually benefit each other? And that means everything done to the producer has to make a bottom line. You have to have healthy cows, you have to have healthy grass, healthy wildlife resource for whatever, just for the sake of wildlife or for the, for our outdoor hunting and fishing pursuits, right? It's a big, complicated question. It's a very difficult question for everyone, but especially if you're a small producer or a producer who relies solely on what's within your boundary. So TNC is able to use some of our science and some of our other avenues that those producers might not have to help answer some of those questions. So can we use our science and knowledge generated on the preserve to have influence outside the ZPP fence line? That's one of our big models right now. It's kind of what we're chasing in terms of sustainable grazing, and the Zumwalt Prairie Preserve is more or less the flagship sustainable grazing property that TNC owns in Oregon right now. Not to say that we don't have grazing on other properties, because we do, but the majority of the influence is coming from ZPP right now, which is awesome. It makes it unique and special. So yeah, are we able to have enough influence to talk to the BLM or the Forest Service about how they're grazing their property and how they handle lessees and what types of what types of activities are going to be good for the first question I had in the first slide. And then private ranchers are, our neighbors going to take us seriously based on what we can do within our own fence line, right? You got to prove it first. So the sustainable grazing program then lends us to other opportunities, right? If the resource is managed well, it provides good resource for wildlife, and that gives us the opportunity to have a hunt program in the first place. And this is the way that we break it down from a TNC internal standpoint. We have our LOP program, which is the landowner preference hunt program. So the tag that we donated to BHA that we're all talking about tonight is part of that program. We do have an antlerless elk hunt that takes place across the greater Zumwalt. We're a participant in that hunt. We have youth opportunities. Usually 2 bull hunters get permission to access the preserve a year, and 2 youth turkey hunters. It's a little bit different that we sign up for those, but we have 2 bull hunters and 2 turkey hunters a year. And then in the past, we've had a pretty robust shed antler collection program, which is all that money has been raised from the shed antler collection, goes straight back to the community as well. And again, none of these opportunities are available if the resource isn't there. If the resource isn't there, the vegetative resource isn't there, the animals aren't there, none of it happens, right? So other ways that TNC sees hunting and hunting participants as a win. We have some degree of control over population management and distribution within our own boundary. If we have key areas that are being affected by too many elk, we can try to influence that, or vice versa. Gives us a degree of legitimacy with hunting conservation organizations, and like BHA, we do some work with TRCP, OHA. We did a collaboration with Meat Eater. A lot of times TNC isn't necessarily recognized in the hunting world, and rightfully so. But I think most people would be surprised at how many hunting opportunities are across the nation in different states within TNC. And that's important, right? Because it allows us to form these partnerships with great, awesome groups like BHA. And these are the same groups that, our TNC government relations team is going to Capitol Hill with and saying, hey, we need to band together on bills for clean water and for access and all these types of things that we feel are important. So it just gives us that platform in which we can have these types of conversations. It gives us extended opportunities to partner with state and federal agencies. Obviously, this is a big one. ODF&W, tribal fisheries, habitat management type work, all the above. I mean, there's a huge list of partners that are so important to making these things work on both the private and public side. And we can kind of have influence, on both sides of that coin. We've done a lot of work with Leland Brown. I'm sure you guys have heard of Leland. He works for the Oregon Zoo. He runs their non-lead education program. It has given us a platform to work with him on some of his initiatives on non-lead education, which has been great. And then these, you know, all these projects and all these collaborations and all these things that are good for us at CPP are also good for other key conservation species across the state and across the West that all of these groups are also working on. So the hunt program does a lot for TNC besides, you know, giving Tyler an awesome job, right? And a chance for you to have an awesome experience when you go on a hunt. We still get that, but there's a way more to it than that. So, to break the LOP program down just a little bit more, is for both elk and deer. This tag we're talking about tonight that PHA has is a deer tag. So TNC solicits applications from local charity organizations or conservation-minded partner organizations. And generally what we ask them to do at that point is to take that tag and run a raffle versus like a straight auction. And then there's actually a community panel who comes in and reviews those applications. And so the community pretty much has full control of where that benefit is going to end up going within the community. TNC does not take any money from that program. It's a strict charity organization, conservation organization run outfit. TNC is just happy to provide the resource because we feel that strongly that it's that important. It started in 2002 and through 2001, you can see, I mean, it's had pretty significant impact. Almost, I'm sure it's even higher than 700 at this point. I haven't updated it for a while, probably $750,000. That's big time. So yeah, it's been extremely successful. Gosh, there's a bunch of pictures of bucks right there. I think I'm gonna let Tyler jump in for a second, unless we want to pause for questions specifically to TNC. Any of the stuff that I just went over? Does it feel like a good time for a pause?
Yeah, if folks have any questions right now, shoot them in. We haven't gotten any in the last few minutes, so.
While we're waiting for that, Chad, can you go back to the first slide that you had up? The one
Sure.
where you're looking north up Camp Creek at the Shed Antler.
Yep.
Cool. So this is towards the southern edge of the property, and it's looking north. Camp Creek there on the right, and then Short Ridge is right in the middle of the picture, and kind of Trail Creek just in front of that. And when people hear Zumwalt Prairie Preserve, obviously Prairie is in the name of the preserve, and they get an idea of flat. We're going to be walking out across rolling prairie, but these canyons that you see in the picture are where we do the majority of our hunting. There are a few places on the buttes, especially that I do look for deer, and it's a great place to hunt as long as the deer are there. But primarily, we're finding them in the canyons, and in Trail Creek that I mentioned, that's right, kind of in the middle of the picture, is one of the main places we find it. So the elevation we're at right now, from where this picture was taken, obviously it was in the spring, but that's the level of the prairie, and then it drops off into a canyon system that eventually connects up with the Greater Hells Canyon kind of complex. Just to give people an idea of kind of the terrain. This picture was taken in the spring. Obviously, it's a lot yellower when we're going to be hunting bucks in October. But if you do get a chance to come out to the preserve in the springtime and the early summer, it's beautiful with all of the wildflowers and the grass being green.
It is, yeah, the wildflowers there are insane. I can second that. Tyler, and a question for Chad, for both of y'all. And maybe you're going to get to this in a few minutes, but we had a question about, what kind of shot ranges should people anticipate? And how should one condition themselves to be ready for that kind of landscape?
Run all the time, everywhere you go, is the only way you're gonna be able to get ready. Well, you can obviously see that it's relatively wide open, and we are looking north here, so we're not looking at the north side of the hills, which are primarily forested in a lot of situations. So depending on the direction you're looking on the preserve, you can kind of get a false sense that it's really, really open. If you could see on the backside of those hills, there is forest. But the primary way that we conduct hunts is spot and stalk. You can see that it's probably like 3 or 4 miles that we can see just in this picture. So a decent pair of binoculars is definitely a must. And I always carry my gigantic spotting scope. The thing weighs probably like 4 or 5 pounds. The hunter's carrying a rifle, and a lot of times, especially with modern rifles, their rifle might be lighter than my spotting scope and tripod setup that I'm lugging around. But we will shoot at a distance that is comfortable for the shooter. I'm never going to ask somebody, the hunter, to shoot farther than they're comfortable with. On average, we're looking at an ideal distance would be 200 yards. If we can get closer, that would be amazing. You obviously want to get rid of all the variables possible before you take that shot. I would really hesitate to take shots over 300, especially on deer. And the conditions will have to be right for that. And normally we won't have to. A lot of times when long shots like that get taken on public land, it's because you're afraid that maybe somebody else is going to get in on that deer before you can, and you've got to hurry up and you've got to take that shot. There's might not be any chance to get closer, but we are the only hunters on that 33,000 acre piece of land, and so you can take that part out of the equation, and that level of nervousness that sometimes happens, and we will attempt to get as close as possible. But having said that, I think 200 yards is what I prefer. But when you're practicing, I think you should practice at like 3 or 4 just to get comfortable at that distance, because that 200 yards is going to feel like a point blank chip shot after you've practiced at 400 or 500.
Awesome, thank you. That's really helpful.
I think that's a pretty good point. And as a guide as well, I would say I can't stress enough like how important, because a lot of us, right? Maybe we have gone on guided hunts, maybe we haven't. Treat it like you're going hunting with a friend who just happens to know the place, right? This is not like a high stress situation where you're having to perform in front of a whatever professional. That leads me to the next point, is like there's nothing that a guide appreciates more than somebody who's just honest. If you lay down and you're behind the gun and you're like, man, I just don't feel comfortable with this shot, he would say, thank you for telling me that. Let's work something else out. Or, vice versa. But just man, don't be afraid to let your guide know what you're thinking, or ask a question, or that type of thing as well. Because I'm right on par with what Tyler's saying. It's like, we can make any scenario work.
Yep. And it really depends on the hunter. Once I get the name of the person that is going to be getting the tag, I usually shoot them a text with some answers to frequently asked questions, and then I have some questions of them, their hunting experience, how far they're comfortable shooting, what they use as a deer rifle, and also one of the big ones, as you can see from the picture behind us, is are you afraid of heights? Because I've learned the hard way that you should probably ask that before you head out on one of those rims or something, just to make sure that the hunter is comfortable with where you're going. Because I can tailor a hunt to just about anybody, and make sure that they are comfortable with what we're doing.
Yeah, I guess just this has nothing to do with your question, but speaking of tailoring it to anybody, the way the LOP tags work is they are transferable. So maybe one of you win the tag and you're like, I would love to take my kid, I would love to take my grandpa. You can transfer that tag to anyone's name. Or if you're really good for Christmas, maybe they'll transfer it to your name. You know, I don't know. Let's see, what else was there in terms of that? I guess hunt specifics. You're able to bring 2 observers with you on the hunt. So you and two of your friends or family.
2 of your friends with excellent high quality glass that they are good at using.
What do you value more, Tyler? High quality glass or a strong back and pack frame?
Those are both very important, but getting along with the hunter is nice. Conversationalist. I love to talk, especially about myself, but every once in a while there is a lull in the conversation, and having buddies around certainly adds to the enjoyment of the hunt.
TNC provides lodging most of the time. COVID hasn't quite screwed that up for us. Anyway, TNC can provide lodging, all the amenities. It's all run on solar power with a generator, propane generator backup. All the houses, you have a refrigerator, you have stovetop. You're responsible for your own food. You're responsible for your own transportation to the preserve. The houses have bunks, but they don't have bedding. So bring your own bedroll, sleeping bag, pillow, teddy bear, whatever it is that you need to bring. That's a quick rundown.
Yeah. I can't emphasize too much that you're responsible for your own food when you're there, because you don't want to eat the various different top ramen recipes that I am expert at.
I watched him buy like a 3-foot long sub sandwich one time, and it just stayed in his pack for like a week, and he just slowly ate his way down the sandwich for a week straight. Might have been a couple. It
stayed nice and cold. It was later in the season. It was during elk season. It stayed nice and cold, but it was always there.
Just in case.
And I would gladly share it with any of the hunters or anybody else that wanted to have some of my giant sandwich.
I wouldn't share it after he's been packing meat. Cool. Well, that's kind of a good segue actually into where we left off on the slides, because that was where I was going to turn Tyler loose to start talking about the actual hunt anyway. So,
yep.
Great question. Great questions.
Yeah, so here's a collection of some of the bucks that we've been lucky enough to take off of the preserve. And it gives you an idea of kind of the size and age class of animal. We're obviously looking for the largest example that we can find as we're going around, but to go along with that, I'm also looking for, an animal that is in a right spot, that we're able to take cleanly, of course, that we can get close to. And we're obviously looking to have fun on these hunts. It is called a trophy hunt, but I am not so focused on the trophy aspect that I'm going to forget that we're supposed to be having fun. And we're going to be going at the pace that the hunter wants to go at. Chad mentioned that the tags are transferable. On the right-hand side, you'll see this young man. That was his first buck, and his father actually got the tag and transferred it to him. And we were able to get this buck opening morning of his hunt, and I think he's probably ruined for deer hunting for a little while from that experience. In the first hour of daylight, we saw 3 different shooter bucks that he would have been more than happy to take, and I would have been more than happy to let him go after. But this one happened to be the largest of the 3, and it was in a place that we were able to get to relatively easily. And that was probably the highlight, one of the highlights at least of the last year, was being able to be with this young man when he shot that buck. That was a pretty cool buck. And then on the left side of the screen at the top, we've got Irene with I don't know if I came up with a name for that buck. His big giant trident there in the back on his left side, maybe the devil would be a good name for that buck. He has a really interesting antler structure there at the base, and Chad had actually spotted him maybe 3 or 4 years before that, or even longer.
This has been
that
3,
you
I
found
think.
that picture. Yeah, yep. And that's actually one of the hunts where I discovered the importance of asking the hunter if they were afraid of heights or not. Because I had quite a big hike planned for Irene, and we worked our way up a canyon and then and gained quite a bit of elevation. But since you're in the bottom of this draw, you don't really notice how much elevation you've gained. And then we turned on a elk trail and stayed level. And in the canyon system, if you stay level, you would be surprised at how much elevation you can gain just by walking on a side hill elk trail that stays level. And once we got out onto the point, and it wasn't terribly steep, but the exposure was pretty decent. And Irene mentioned to me that she might be a tad bit afraid of heights. And so we got down from there, and I said, what we might do for the rest of the day is we might walk up Trail Creek Road. In the bottom of the canyon, there's no fear of falling off of anything in particular. And we slowly walked up that road and waited for dark. And that buck right there that ended up scoring 174 or 175 right in there. He walked out on a hillside. There in Trail Creek, there's a lot of 6-7 foot tall brush lining each side of the canyon. And the deer, when they're done feeding for the night, will filter back into their bedding positions in that tall brush, and they'll disappear, and they won't move until about an hour before dark, or when the sun goes behind the ridge and it starts to get cool. And then all of a sudden antlers will start popping up from the brush, and hopefully we'll see something that looks like the buck Irene shot right there. And then we were able to get into a shooting position and take him. That was a really cool hunt. And that big hike we did, that certainly cemented the adventure aspect in her mind of the hunt. It didn't matter that that buck was probably, you know, less than 1,000 yards off of the main road that we ended up shooting him. And then the other two bucks down below, the one on the right got taken. They actually both got taken in the Trail Creek area. So all of the three over there on the left got taken in an area that's just excellent habitat that we're really lucky to have on the preserve. And the one in the lower left is a 4x5 that I had been watching for about 3 weeks before we ended up taking him. And then the buck on the lower right, I don't recall ever having seen him. He was extremely wide and he just popped up one day. Actually, a couple days before that gentleman's hunt was even supposed to start. I knew he was in the area and I was done with my first hunt, and I said, hey, do you want to go drive around on the property just a little bit and go on a hike? And he said, yeah, I'm not doing anything. And on our walk, that's the buck that we happened to find. And he decided that he needed to take him. So yeah, each one of those bucks is a special memory. And I don't know if Chad ended up putting any of the other deer photos up in any additional slides, but on my Instagram page, I did a post today that I put all 8 deer up of the ones that I took. The one in the upper left here was actually up on the prairie. That was one of the few deer we've taken that wasn't down in the canyon. And he was an excellent buck too. One of the issues with hunting up on the prairie is getting close to deer. Obviously you run out of cover at quite a distance. And so you're trying to utilize any little change in the elevation or brush or a fence line to try and get as close as possible. And I think that buck was about 250 or 300 was the distance on that shot. Obviously, when you get up on the prairie, distances get a little longer sometimes just because you run out of cover. And then maybe Chad can talk about these other 3 bucks because I think those were ones that he was in on the hunts. But
Yeah, if you have questions and want to jump in, that'd be great. I'm sure it's extra boring hearing about hunting stories, right? It's kind of why we're all in it. That pair of bucks on the right, it was actually a husband and wife, and they won the tags in consecutive years. Maybe you guys know Joe and Jerry Jakewith, but yeah, consecutive years they won tags. Each had great hunts, killed mature deer. Like Tyler said, you know, it's always situational, but we're always looking for mature and clearly as the hunter, you have a huge role to play in that. And it could be that, you know, you guys can go back and forth on the selection process that you might have. The only other thing that I asked of people is, for the most part, I would say, man, I'm happy to let you harvest whatever you want. You just have to be happy with that choice. And obviously we don't have problems with that, but just as hunters as a whole, I think everybody here is probably on board with that. If it's, you know, if it's something that you're going to regret after you pull the trigger, then probably better do some soul searching before you pull the trigger next time. But we're looking for mature deer. And then, you know, whatever happens beyond that is how it plays out. In terms of mature deer, well, I guess I should say also that we collect teeth for aging from every animal that's harvested on the preserve. And so we have a data set of ages and we compare that to different things over time. You know, we can pull weather data sets to see how deer do over drought situations. We can pull Like we'll take scores on every deer, just gross Boone and Crockett score, and gives us a metric with the work, so we can get an idea of, you know, the genetics in the area or what those types of bucks are producing. And there's always, you know, there's always gaps in the data, but at this point, I mean, we've had, gosh, you know, the data set's growing all the time. So it's just a fun, interesting thing that we do from those animals that are harvested. You guys will get updated on what the age of your animal was. And I encourage people to do that through the state. It's a state ODF&W program. You can do it with any of the animals that you harvest. I think it's extremely interesting information to pull as hunters. Just helps us learn what we're looking at when we're trying to field judge animals on the hoof. You know, as mule deer situation continues to struggle across the West, like maybe we're making that decision to hunt only mature animals instead of taking young deer, and that teeth data that you can learn from, or somebody else in your hunting party can learn from, is super valuable. I nerd out on it all the time, so I won't talk about it anymore. But yeah, you just have obviously the anomaly too, that buck down in the lower left is just a tremendous deer. It's his body, his antlers, everything about him was one of the biggest deer I've ever been around personally. His age came back at 5.5. He gross scored 198, and he had a 5-inch kicker there on his right side. So you know, he's a mainframe 193-inch typical, which is a pretty special deer, no matter where you are in the West. From the data sets that I have kept, I think that from a genetic standpoint, maybe this matters to some of you, maybe it doesn't, but it's interesting. Obviously, genetics play a huge role in antler growth, body size, all these different things, right? So we're talking about our area here on the Zumwalt. What I'm finding is those deer will start to show those big characteristics by the time they're about 4. They're not really reaching their peak antler growth until 6. It doesn't mean that a 6-year-old deer is always going to be a giant. Maybe they just never had that genetic to begin with. This particular deer was 5.5. I'm not convinced that he was done. Certainly mature. Definitely, you know, checked all those boxes that we're looking for. But interesting. I mean, most of us probably don't think that it would take 6.5 years for a mule deer to reach peak antler growth, but that's kind of what the data set is showing us. So if you're choosing areas where you're hunting and you're wanting to see deer that have had the potential to reach their peak, but you look at the age data from ODF&W, and most deer harvested are 2.5 to 3.5. It's like, well, most of those deer aren't old enough to reach the peak. So, or vice versa, right? Just interesting ways that we can kind of manipulate our own experience if we know what we're looking at based on data. Yeah, it was a tremendous buck. Another view from Long Ridge looking down into Camp Creek. A lot of the Camp Creek drainage from top to bottom is over 1,000-foot vertical. Some places it's closer to 1,500-foot vertical. I had a fella looking straight across onto that really steep face. He was there on a late season elk hunt one time, and we were coming around a rim, and I heard him slip. He was above me. He had like on the swishy pants, you know, and he literally turned into a human toboggan. I jumped on him before he could fly off a rim, like almost bad. And super good guy. He was older, had a really deep voice. He goes, well, that was fun. And I said, Art, I actually didn't like that at all. Let's not do that again. again, that's where being in good communication with your guide is key. Like saying, hey man, I don't think we should go up there, or I don't feel comfortable going up there. Also, like Tyler said, you know, be in good shape. If you're able to do so. If you're not, that's fine. We could find other ways to hunt the preserve. The best way I've found to get in shape to hike is to hike. I can jog flat ground all the time, and then I start hiking and I feel like my legs are on fire. So yeah, that's the only way I can do it. Everybody has a way. Stairmaster maybe. Anybody have anything?
Yeah, we just got a question from Jason.
Yeah.
With Oregon's mule deer population severely declining over the past 30 to 40 years or so, how has the preserve's population fared compared to Oregon as a whole?
Yeah, no, that's a super good question. So we don't have any like deer specific surveys that happen on the preserve. It's pretty much strictly observational. We run cameras, we're paying attention to deer numbers through observation. So we don't have exact counts. That said, the preserve is following the trend of mule deer across the state, but in a little bit interesting type of way. We have all these factors, you know, that affect mule deer populations, and BHA, some of the pint nights you guys have done have been specifically about mule deer, where you're talking with ODFW professionals. And I encourage you guys to go look up those conversations if they're still recorded through BHA, because they're awesome. I sat in on them as well. So, you know, especially if we're talking like down around Bend, we've got all this human interface and our expansion that affect mule deer. We've got migration routes, you know, land development. We have overgrazing issues on public land. We have, and private land. There's this huge list of factors that affect how mule deer interact on a landscape. The preserve is interesting because we're able to take out a lot of those factors. The habitat quality is super high. The grazing impacts are very low. We don't have migration corridor problems. We don't have, you know, development. What we do have is heavy predation. In this Wallowa County, and especially around the preserve, the predators are high. They are having an impact on mule deer. The preserve specifically in the last 20 years had a very high elk population, which is now declining through methods like the antlerless hunt program, which was kind of the point, right? We wanted to bring that back down into balance a little bit. But what that elk population being so high did was it supported a high predator population. And you know, cougars in Camp Creek were eating elk. They prefer mule deer, but these cats were killing and eating a lot of elk because that was the game that was available. We have a lot of bears. It's great bear habitat. We have wolves are new on the landscape, relatively so, right? There's a wolf pack and or two that come through the preserve quite often. So a host of predators is mainly at this point. I guess I got sidetracked a little bit. What happened when the elk population started to decline, right? You can put the pieces together. The elk were fewer and far between on the preserve. So those predators just all of a sudden they were there, and the deer were still there. And so I think they've been working on the deer pretty hard. So we have seen that trend, but not to the extent that the rest of the state is seen, and certainly not to the extent that, you know, across the West and other areas. The habitat condition is just so good on the preserve that, and we can be so selective. There's no overharvest. And right, you can listen to the other mule deer talks, but it's so based on fawn survival. You know, fawn survival is the kicker. It's not necessarily buck harvest. So our population ebbs and flows with the abilities for those fawns to survive. through the first year and then able to reproduce. So maybe I felt like I kind of rambled through that question, but it was a great question. I love talking about that type of stuff.
Nice. Well, we have another question, but not specifically related to this slide. Did you, I don't want to take us too off track if you have a little bit more you wanted to cover before we get to general Q&A.
No, I don't think that we had a lot more in terms of content, unless Tyler had a few other things about the hunt specifically. I think you guys got a pretty good idea of how it rolls out, and if you happen to be the lucky winner, then you'll get the full crash course from him when the time comes. I kicked in some cool trail cam videos and a couple pictures. And that we're pretty much ready for anything you guys can throw our way.
Okay, awesome. Well, yeah, submit some more questions if you have them, folks. We still have a few more minutes here. I got a question about non-lead ammo. I know that VHA, we're a part of the non-lead partnership. And you mentioned working with Leland and the Oregon Zoo. Can you just speak a little bit? It's not required for this hunt, is my understanding, but can you speak to why you think it's important?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the low-hanging fruit right off the bat, selfishly for TNC on the Zumwalt Prairie is the prairie is kind of known for its raptor population, right? We have a super diverse birds of prey population, a lot of scavenging birds, eagles, bald eagles, golden eagles. And, you know, not only do we think that there's like a human health aspect that we should all be aware of, there's a wildlife health aspect that we should be aware of. And when the antlerless hunts were in their prime, and we had, 200 antlerless elk hunters on the Zumwalt a year, 300, then it felt like a great time to partner with Leland and the different groups that he's working with and spreading the education. TNC does not require the use of non-lead. We don't believe that type of mandate is going to be effective in the long run. A lot of that stems from Leland and his ability to teach us, right? But the technology is catching up, and especially when we're talking about calibers that you're going to be hunting for deer with elk, if you get a little on the heavy end of the elk realm, some of that bullet technology isn't quite there yet but it's catching up fast. And we just ask folks to think about it for their own personal reasons, whatever it is. And then we, help Leland with his data that we collect on the preserve through the antlerless hunts and support his programs that way.
Yeah, totally. And if folks haven't heard about the non-lead partnership, I recommend just give it a quick Google and take a look at the stuff they have on there. VHA is definitely a supporter of the voluntary switch. And there's a lot of good stuff on there. So one other question that I have, and we kind of touched on this a little bit, but maybe as sort of a takeaway for folks, what are one or two things that you wish every first-time hunter to the Zumwalt knew or will know before they arrive there?
Tyler, go.
Yeah, sure. How far they're capable of shooting would be a great one. So before we go on a hunt, I usually have them show up the day before their hunt starts, and I meet them that morning and we have some breakfast and talk about their expectations. So that would be another one, is what their particular expectations are of the hunt. And then we can discuss that. And then from there, we go to the range. And that's one of my hard and fast non-negotiable rules, is that we go to the range before the hunt starts to make sure your rifle is on, to make sure that we're going to have an ethical shot, to take all of the particular variables out of the equation, to try to try to skirt around Murphy's Law there a little bit. And I will have them practice out to as far as they're comfortable. And hopefully they are using the rifle they're most comfortable with. Because what I usually recommend to people is shoot the rifle you're most comfortable and you're most accurate with, not the biggest magnum that you can find. Because we are shooting at deer. We want to obviously anchor them and have a nice clean kill with the animal. But if the rifle that you're shooting is a smaller than average caliber, then if you can shoot that perfectly, that's the rifle I want you to shoot, not some rifle that will shoot, 2-3 miles with a 280 grain bullet. Being comfortable with the distance they can shoot is a very important one, and knowing what they might want out of the hunt.
Yeah, I would second that. I would say approach the experience as a whole experience, not as a deer hunt. Think about, the things that are going to be important takeaways for you, regardless of whether you get one or not, even though your success rate percentage is going to be very high. So what are the things that are going to make that trip memorable for you and the folks who get to come with you? And then just kind of soak it in, let the Zumwalt kind of just show you and make sure that you're paying attention.
Yeah, usually the first day I choose an area that I haven't been to very much on the preserve, or where I think there might be some potential of there being a big buck that I haven't been able to observe from a distance, because I don't want to go in there and scare anything. And so I'll pick a hike in a more obscure area of the preserve for that first day. We'll go on a hike and we will see what we find there. And then after that first day, we can make a decision on where we want to go. But the second day, we'll go to places that we'll actually buckle down and zero in on a place where I know there's a big buck. But we'll use that first day to kind of experience and see as much of the preserve as we can. And so you can get an idea of what we're trying to do there. Yeah.
But to remember, there's a big difference between seeing the preserve and looking good here on the preserve. And we're talking 33,000 acres, it's big, and there's cuts. I mean, you can be looking at it at the same hillside for an hour and not see a deer, and then one pops up. And if you're not in that window at that time, that's just deer hunting. You guys all understand that. But it's a 3-day hunt. You cannot thoroughly look at this whole piece of property in 3 days. You just can't do it. So you're trying to do the best that you can in the time that you have, and you're going to see a lot in 3 days. But the point is there are bucks that you haven't seen ever. There are bucks that you haven't seen for 3 years and he shows up for no reason. There are bucks that are pretty regular. And there's everything in between. It's a big place, and it's a fun place to hunt. Basically, you have to hunt.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for sharing those insights. Those are all really helpful. And I'm going to drop the link to the raffle in the chat again, just in case you've been thinking about it. You decided maybe you want to buy 1 or 5. I think the limit is 100 per person. Don't quote me on that, but if you're feeling really excited.
Should I run through some of these videos and that will tempt people to?
Yeah, let's take a quick look.
That's a nice buck. Cruising through.
It's a rough part of your job.
These stealth cam videos are so cool. This guy's helping us with our noxious weed problem. He's a contractor. That's a pretty typical. I don't know what happened to him. I haven't seen him. Yeah, no, that kind of wraps up our presentation, but definitely want to throw the TNC plug in for you guys over at BHA. We do a lot of collaboration, idea bouncing, support a lot of the projects that you guys work on, you know, for the hunting community and the outdoor space. And like I said before, I mean, a lot of the same battles that TNC is working on, BHA is right there to be a partner in that. And that's what it's going to take, right? We're seeing these shifts in demographics, and we're seeing shifts in the way that wildlife resources are being used or viewed or whatever. And it can't be it can't be all these groups individually fighting individual causes. It's going to have to be a team effort, and whether that's public access on the minimum or the ability to use hounds in Colorado or whatever happens to be the hot topic at the moment. Spring bear hunts in Washington, as sportsman affiliated groups, we're going to have to be on the same team on those topics. And so it's awesome to partner with a group like BHA to be able to get some of those things done.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, we're really thankful to get to partner with you two as well, and grateful for all the work that you're doing. I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up for the evening. I really appreciate both your time, and thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. I really hope that you have a chance to buy one or a few raffle tickets. I just got a text from another board member that there's no limit on how many you can purchase. So if you want a chance at a really incredible opportunity, get to hang out with Tyler and support some wonderful conservation work, please consider that. And otherwise, Tyler and Chad, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you all. Thanks for hopping on.
Awesome. Okay, well, have a wonderful night, everyone. Thanks so much, and we will see you on the next time.
Bye.
Bye.